Welcome to the Queen of Hearts podcast. And here's the queen herself, registered dietitian Heather Klug.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Queen of Hearts podcast. With me today, I have our nurse from the Karen Yontz Center, Kirsten Hastings. Welcome, Kirsten.
Hey, Heather. How are you?
I am doing well. Well, thank you for being on the podcast with me today. Kirsten and I are going to be talking about high blood pressure, and we thought this would be a really good topic to talk about because with COVID-19 and coronavirus, with kind of the latest research and the data coming out, high blood pressure is looking like it's one of the top risk factors for COVID-19 mortality, right? So it's a really crucial kind of thing to be talking about. It's important regardless, even without this happening in the world. It's always important to manage blood pressure, but especially important. So, Kirsten, a nurse, and I know that you are always looking into the research, you're always reading up on things. What are the current thoughts on high blood pressure these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. I do love looking at the research. And there is just an abundance of information about high blood pressure, which is the same thing as hypertension, of course. Just literally thousands of articles. It's so important. And so kind of want to take a step back from the COVID situation and just bring us back a little bit. In the past, we used to think that high blood pressure really was starting at like 140/90. And in the last couple of years, we've really done what they call a deep dive into the literature and looking at different values. And we really realized that that number is way too high. And that in order to reduce our cardiovascular risk, we really need to lower people's blood pressure much more than that.
Yeah, so they updated the guidelines back in 2017, correct?
Yeah. And so in 2017, they re-leveled out the guidelines. And so our optimal blood pressure based on those 2017 guidelines is less than 120/80. And what they call stage 1 high blood pressure is in the 130 to 139/80 to 89 range. So taking it quite a bit down from what we used to think.
Yeah, that used to be the stage 1 category, used to be the pre-hypertension category, correct?
Right. So everything's come down about 10 points. And when we look at the change there, what we found and the reason behind the change in the guidelines, for those with the blood pressure in that 130 to 140/80 to 89 range, they found that those people had double the cardiovascular risk compared to those people that were in the 120/80 range. So
oh, wow.
doubling the risk of cardiovascular complications. And so really felt it was important to change those guidelines and to help people start realizing the importance of lowering that blood pressure. As you know, hypertension is the second leading cause of heart disease and stroke, and that's second only to smoking. So if we can get that really under control, we're really going to limit a lot of our risk.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
and this is important too because quite a few American adults have high blood pressure too, right?
Yeah, based on these new guidelines, it put about 46% of adults in the United States with the hypertension diagnosis. And so half of our population basically has high blood pressure. And then an unfortunate statistic is that only 1 in 4 that do have hypertension actually have it under control. So super important to talk about this today, even prior to the COVID situation, but really something that we need to focus on and more now than ever, as you said.
Yeah. Now, Kirsten, we always hear that high blood pressure is a silent disease. Can you explain to our listeners what that means exactly?
Yeah. So it's possible to have high blood pressure and really not experience any symptoms from it. So that's the silent part of it. Just to take a step back, high blood pressure, I usually kind of liken it in my mind to thinking about turning on the water in a garden hose. So when you have low blood pressure, you have just a little bit of water pressure coming through. But if you can think about a time when you've really turned the water up high and you get a great deal of water coming through there, a lot of force coming through the hose, that's really what's happening when you have high blood pressure in your body. That high blood pressure causes damage to the inside of the blood vessels and then weakens them from that continued force of the blood pounding against the walls. We talk a lot about
Yeah.
cholesterol and plaques and things like that being on the inside of the blood vessels as well. And if you think about that force of the blood going through there, lots of times that's what causes that plaque to rupture off and go forward in the bloodstream as a blood clot, which ultimately is what causes a lot of strokes and heart attacks.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. As you know, because we talk a lot, quite a bit at work about high blood pressure. I'm pretty passionate about it and making sure people understand why we talk to them so much about getting their blood pressure numbers in good control, right? Because of that damage that's being done to the blood vessels. Like, I often think it should be called a different name because it doesn't sound as serious to me. But if we could keep in mind that it's damaging those blood vessels, and in the long run, that's why we're seeing this increased risk in all sorts of areas. Because basically, anywhere blood goes, then that means it affects those organs too. So
Exactly, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
so,
So if people don't know that they have high blood pressure because there aren't a lot of symptoms for it, I mean, what do you recommend people should do?
yeah, I can't stress enough how important it is to get regular blood pressure checks. And it's not really that hard to do. There's a variety of places that people can go to have their blood pressure checked. Of course, we can do it at our doctor's office. Lots of dental offices will do it, and other providers have the ability to take blood pressures. And sometimes it's just a matter of asking. If you don't have an appointment per se, most pharmacies will have an automatic blood pressure cuff that you can just take your own blood pressure. And lots of people don't know it, but most pharmacists will take your blood pressure with a manual cuff as well. So that's another option.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know
So,
that. I didn't know that. Okay.
yep, yep. And of course, at the Karen Yontz Center, right now we're not necessarily open to the public, but if people want a blood pressure, that's typically one of the things that we provide at the center. It's usually just a drop in, but at this point, it could be by appointment. If someone wants to help getting their blood pressure checked, they can give us a call and we'd be happy to work with them to figure out how they can do that.
Yeah. Good. And how often do you think people should check their blood pressure?
So, for people that have a normal blood pressure, I think that it depends on their age and their other health issues, but at a minimum of once a year. If people have had a high blood pressure or a diagnosis of that, then it should be checked much more frequently. For people that are on medication, it probably should be checked at least every 3 months. For people that are working on some lifestyle issues, which we'll probably get to, every 6 months. It's such an easy thing to do. There's really no reason not to do it. And I guess I would err on the side of more frequently than less.
Okay. Can you kind of go through some different steps for getting an accurate blood pressure measurement too? So when people do get it done, they are getting the most accurate one they can get?
Yeah, yeah, this is another area that came out of the literature. We found several things that actually kind of falsely elevate the blood pressure. So,
Hmm.
if you're planning on having your blood pressure checked, these are some things to think about. Caffeine is going to elevate your blood pressure, and so they suggest not having any caffeine for about an hour prior to having your blood pressure checked. Beyond that, you would want to empty your bladder and try to just kind of sit quietly. Obviously, do it in a time when you're not, super stressed out from trying to get to an appointment or whatever. We find that that will increase it sort of in a false way. So sit quietly, have your feet uncrossed, your arms should be at heart level, and the blood pressure cuff should fit appropriately on the arm. So if you hear when somebody is pumping up the cuff and it's starting to pull away or kind of feel like the Velcro is pulling apart, then the cuff may not be properly sized. And all of those things are going to add additional points to the blood pressure value.
Talking during the measurement is a big no-no as well, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Yep, trying to be quiet before and during the blood pressure monitoring is very important. So these things will give a raise between somewhere between 2 and 3 points, up to like 10 points higher than your normal blood pressure would be. So really important to make sure you follow all of those steps.
Okay. Now, before we go into talking about how to manage blood pressure, can we talk about age a little bit? Because you wrote down a statistic here on the outline that's kind of interesting about how if you have a normal blood pressure, even when you're younger, that you still have a high chance of developing hypertension over the long run. Can you go over that a little bit?
Sure, sure. Hypertension is really a disease, if you will, of aging. And so for every decade of life, your blood pressure is anticipated to go up. So I've talked to lots of people that will tell me, oh, I don't need to have my blood pressure checked. It's absolutely fine. I've never had high blood pressure. Some of the research indicated that people that have had a normal blood pressure through the age of 55, when they looked at it, those people still had a 90% chance of developing hypertension over the rest of their lifetime. So just because it's normal
Mm,
and has been normal over time, we know that there's a likelihood that most of us are going to develop hypertension at some point. So again,
yeah.
silent disease, really important that we stay on top of monitoring it and monitoring it accurately.
Yeah, some of the statistics I had, I was looking it over, like it was comparing, genders and even different ethnicities. But in terms of age, there was like a big jump at age 45, where all of a sudden the percentage rates went up. And then there was another big bump at age 55. So I think you're absolutely correct. It's just something we all need to make sure that we're checking regularly, even if it's been good before.
Yep, yep. So take advantage of those
Okay.
opportunities.
So, Kirsten, let's talk about like, okay, let's say you get your blood pressure checked and it's in that stage 1 area, right? What do people do when they're in that area?
Okay,
What
yeah.
is
So
recommended?
yeah, so
Well, it's
just to
just a
remind,
little higher than what's recommended.
yeah, just to remind everyone, the stage one blood pressure value that we're talking about, it's between 130 and 140 over 80 to 89. And so for people in that category, really, this is a big chance for us to focus on our lifestyle. Unless someone's had a heart attack or a stroke, really at this point, it's not recommended that people start on medications. So this is the chance where we kind of have that aha moment and we say, oh, I have stage one high blood pressure and kind of time to get on top of it. So the big things to do, stop smoking if you are a smoker. I know that's not an easy thing to do, but smoking contributes heavily to high blood pressure and then poor cardiovascular outcomes. So if you're a smoker, that would be the big area to start with.
Can I add something in there about the smoking? Because I
Sure.
thought this was interesting that, when you smoke, your blood pressure goes up about 10 points, up to an hour after that person smoked a cigarette. And then if somebody were to quit, your blood pressure already starts to go down 1 day with being off cigarettes. Isn't that interesting? So you start to see those changes right away in your blood pressure.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why for people who are smokers, that's usually the area that we focus on to get the most reduction in the most rapid way. So that's why I start with that because that is really powerful if you can stop smoking. And I know it doesn't happen overnight,
Mhm.
but as you said, there's immediate benefits. So even reducing how many cigarettes you smoke is going to have you in a lower blood pressure the less time that you're smoking.
What's another lifestyle change people can make?
Just maintaining a healthy weight. So if you're at a healthy weight already, just working to maintain that. If you're not at a healthy weight, then maybe taking some more significant steps to get down to that ideal body weight. And that kind of leads into one of the other things, which is to be more active. So activity, exercise, that will also keep your blood pressure in the lower categories and bring it down. Limiting your alcohol use if you do use alcohol. Decreasing stress can be helpful. And then one of the biggies is decreasing the amount of sodium in our diets, and then conversely adding in potassium rich foods to bring more potassium into our diet.
Oh, yes. This is my area of expertise, right? This is kind of what I really work with people on is increasing the potassium and then trying to cut down on the sodium at the same time.
Yeah. So people always ask me, why is sodium so bad for my blood pressure? And really, if you think about sodium, it causes fluid retention. So it takes your blood volume and it increases the blood volume. So as you have more blood volume, it's going to increase the pressure or force in those blood vessels, like we talked about earlier.
Mm.
So if people are able to limit their sodium, we've seen their blood pressures go down by as much as 10 points by changing, just
Wow.
limiting that amount of sodium. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
a really big drop.
yeah. And then people say, well, that's really hard to do. I don't, how can I do that? And you know this, Heather, and I'm sure you're going to tell us more about it. But I saw one statistic that says 77% of our total sodium intake comes from processed foods. So if we're going to
Yeah.
try to work on that, that's really the biggest way to limit your sodium overall. There's
Right. Yeah.
lots of ways to do that, and I'm sure you'll share those with us. But I really want people to have that big takeaway. 77% of your overall intake comes from processed foods.
Yeah, I think eating out's included in there too, right? It's like processed convenience type foods and then like eating out. Yep. I
Yep.
believe it's that percentage is that high. Yeah.
Okay.
So those are
Okay.
usually a couple of key areas for people to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. And then people always say, well, what about potassium? I don't hear much about that. The way I like to explain that is potassium lessens the effects of sodium, or maybe it combats them, so that we want to limit the sodium and enhance the potassium. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how people could go about doing that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always explain to people that potassium is almost like a diuretic in a way, because you're right, it offsets kind of the effect that sodium has. So it's important to make sure we're getting enough of it in. And potassium comes in a lot of those. It's in a lot of those healthy foods that we tell people to eat more of, right? So it's in a lot of different vegetables and fruits. It's also in nuts and seeds. It's in bran cereals. It's even in like cocoa and dark chocolate and coffee and milk and yogurt and tea. So it's in a lot of foods. And I know the banana comes to mind for people, right? Whenever I recommend people eat more potassium, they always go, "Oh, I already eat a banana." And I go, "Well, that's awesome because bananas are high in potassium, but you need like closer to 3,000 or 3,500 milligrams of potassium a day, and your bananas may be giving you like 500 or 600, right? So the idea is we want to be getting in a lot of different vegetables and fruits and those other, great foods that I mentioned before, so we get enough of that potassium in there. So one banana isn't going to do it, right? So a
Mm-hmm.
few other standouts here that I would recommend, like for vegetables, especially because we've got farmers market season right now. We got tons of variety with produce. Asparagus is good, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, carrots, cauliflower, celery, all your different legumes, the dried beans, split peas, lentils, kale, mushrooms, spinach, potatoes, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, spinach, winter squashes. For your fruits, oh, there's quite a few of them in here. So apricots, avocado, banana, of course, we mentioned, cantaloupe, grapefruit, honeydew, kiwi, orange, prunes, strawberries, tangerines, and then all your different dried fruits are also really high in potassium. So again, the idea is to just eat a bunch of those different things to get the potassium in each day.
Nice, nice. I like the idea of the variety. And I've heard people say you kind of have to eat the rainbow. And as you talk through those, it sounds like that would be a good
Yeah.
way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Eat the rainbow with your foods. Yes.
Do you have any suggestions on limiting salt other than limiting those processed foods? We said that's kind of the main area,
Oh,
but
yep. I sure do. Let me go through what I call my top 10 sneaky salt bombs. Okay.
oh,
So these are the foods that have, yes, these are the foods that have a lot of, salt or sodium in them. And they're things that we mainly buy at the grocery store. Okay. So first one is processed meats and deli meats. And keep in mind as I'm going through all these things, I should backtrack a little bit. I'm not suggesting you have to avoid these foods, but in many cases, it's often that you want to eat these things maybe less often, or when you have them, that you're really watching the portion size a little more carefully. Okay. So again, going back to the processed meats and the deli meats, as less often as you can eat them, kind of the better, right? Number two would be sauces and flavor packets and condiments that we add to food. Like one that jumps out to me is like soy sauce. There's like I think around 900, sometimes up to 1,000 milligrams of sodium for like a tablespoon of that stuff. So just try to sort of go easy on that if you're adding that to foods.
Yeah, on that soy sauce one, that was something that it was interesting to me. A lot of people will purchase the low sodium soy sauce, and they're thinking that that
Mhm.
maybe is a
Yeah.
good option, but really that's still it has less than you said. So, for example, you gave the option of about 1,000, but the low
Mhm.
sodium one still might have 8 or 900. It's just saying it's less than the full sodium one, but still not necessarily a
Oh,
good choice.
yeah. That is actually the reduced sodium. Reduced is very tricky. Okay, reduced means 25% less than the original. So if the original starts out really high, like soy sauce, and you're cutting 25%, you're cutting some, right? It's better than the original, but it's still going to be high. So those kind of things, yeah, you have to be careful of. Low sodium, if it says low sodium, it actually does have to have less than, I want to say it's like 130 milligrams per serving. So that one would be okay. It's the reduced sodium people have to be careful of.
Okay, yeah, good. All right. Well,
Yeah,
thanks for clearing that
yeah,
up because I've heard lots of people tell
yeah.
me that that's okay. And it's important to read that label.
Yeah, but like you're saying though, some people think they're buying low sodium and they're buying the reduced sodium. So you do have to be really careful with what you're purchasing.
Yeah.
Going back to the list, frozen meals, probably no surprise. Like a lot of those frozen dinners or like pizza and like lasagna, all that kind of stuff you can buy is pretty high in sodium. Spaghetti sauce is usually pretty high too. Now, if you ate just a half cup serving, there's around 500 milligrams, but most people eat more than that, right? So that's usually a quantity issue there. Number five are packaged rice mixes. I'm thinking like rice-a-roni and stuff along those lines. So be careful of those. You're often better just making your own versions of those kind of foods. Number six are canned vegetables and then frozen vegetables with the sauces in them. So with that category, definitely go low sodium or no salt added whenever you can. And then the frozen vegetables, buy them without the sauce. Okay. And then number seven are the bottled salad dressings. And this one is kind of a quantity or a portion size issue as well, right? If you're sticking to a tablespoon or two, you can keep those numbers down, but people might use more than that. So then it really adds up. Number eight is cottage cheese. And cottage cheese is great in protein, but it's super high in sodium. So just watch the quantity there. And
Mm.
then number nine is processed breakfast foods. Okay. I'm thinking like those, biscuit sandwiches and even English muffin sandwiches. They usually have processed meat and cheese and stuff like that on them. So you'd want to be careful with those. And then number 10, I hate to pick on this one because we're in the dairy state and I love it myself, but cheese. Cheese
Oh
is
boy.
really high in sodium. Yeah. No, and I love cheese. I eat cheese every day, but here it's all about, hey, just watch the portion size with it, right? Don't go crazy with cheese and stick it on everything.
Yeah.
So those are
Okay.
my top 10 sneaky salt bombs, okay?
Okay. Yeah, I knew you
All
were going to
right.
have some good stuff for us there. So great.
Yeah. Now, I think you mentioned another good way to lower blood pressure, Kirsten, is to decrease stress, right? And this is a really stressful time for all of us. What suggestions do you have to help us on this one?
Yeah, stress comes up in a lot of our podcasts, I think, because it's just a part of our daily life and more part of our daily life recently. So I'm going to start with meditation and something I'm going to call regulated breathing. Both of these can be really powerful tools to reduce stress. And I think we've kind of talked about meditation in some of our other podcasts, but for those that might not have heard those, I recommend some apps called Calm or Insight Timer, Headspace. These are all some that I've used, and I can say that they do a good job. They have free options. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, I would recommend kind of pursuing that. Something we haven't talked about is regulated breathing. And that is something that can be done basically anywhere, and it has immediate calming effects. Again, back to my research, it's been studied. It actually will lower your blood pressure almost immediately. So the common one that you may have heard of is called 478 breathing. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, so 478 breathing is just the concept of focusing on your breath. So inhaling for the count of 4, and then holding the breath for the count of 7, and then exhaling for the count of 8. And you can do a couple of rounds of that, and it will immediately reduce your stress. But again, in our studies, it was also bringing your blood pressure down. So that's one that I really recommend
Yeah.
everybody give it a shot.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like something you can do anytime, anywhere, right?
Yeah, you can
Like you
do
could do
it
that
in
in the
a
car, you can do it when you're standing in line at the grocery store, right? You could do that just when you're starting to feel a little bit stressed or somebody's making you angry, right?
Exactly. Yep. And when you focus on that, it's kind of giving you that pause. So maybe you don't say things you don't want to say or have actions you don't want to do. So it's also really helpful
Yeah.
if you're trying to get to sleep at night. So just laying in bed and focusing on the 478 breathing can be a good way to kind of get some
Okay.
easier steps to fall into sleep.
What about yoga, Kirsten? I've heard a lot of great things about yoga also helping with stress management.
Oh, I'm glad you asked me about that. It's very near and dear to my heart. I've been doing yoga for about 15 years, and I just can't say enough about it. But beyond what I think about it, lots of studies have shown tremendous health benefits from people who do yoga consistently. Some of those benefits might be a little surprising, but they include better blood sugar control for those that are pre diabetic or have diabetes. It helps to control your weight. It actually helps to lower your cholesterol. For people who suffer from chronic pain, they have better pain management when they do yoga. Some things that are probably obvious is that it helps with maintaining balance and flexibility as we age. It's known to help us with insomnia, so you get that better sleep after doing yoga. But as we're talking about here, it's stress reduction and improved peace of mind, which then again leads to that lower blood pressure. So if that's something of interest to you, I would suggest, as always, maybe just chat with your doctor first about this. It tends to be a fairly easier activity to start into. And if you have the okay from your doctor, then you can check out videos on YouTube. There's lots of DVDs available. Lots of gyms are providing yoga through Zoom if you don't feel comfortable going to the class in person. And then there's obviously yoga studios and gyms that provide it. An additional option that I have found that I really like is I use an app on my iPad, and the app is called Yoga Studio. And that also has free
Hmm.
options if you want to just check it out. But what I like about it is the instruction that is provided through the app is consistent with the teacher that I've had as far as a safety and a focus on good form. So that's one that I can personally
Mm.
recommend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, my main form of stress management these days is walking. I've been doing a lot of walking outdoors, with my husband and kids and the dogs. And so I'm sure the research shows that that too helps
Oh,
with
yeah.
stress management.
Absolutely. And I kind of like in that one too, our breathing exercise. Walking is pretty much available to us almost at any time. But if you can walk outdoors, you get in touch with nature, hearing the sounds of nature and seeing the natural environment, seeing trees and flowers, grass, just being outside with the fresh air aids with the reduction in stress. But of course, walking is wonderful distraction, gets our metabolism going a little bit, burn off a few calories. So this can be a good way to maintain our weight, as we spoke about earlier. But getting some extra
Mhm.
steps in, and again, that activity is really crucial to keeping the blood pressure down. So
Good, good.
yeah, yeah. Do you have other ideas for us as far as weight management, since that's really one of the core components of maintaining a good blood pressure?
Yeah, I mean, this is a loaded topic, right? I have lots of suggestions for weight management. I probably should just do a whole podcast on that. In terms of blood pressure control, though, when we look at the research there, really every 2 pounds you lose on average, your blood pressure, that top number in your blood pressure reading will go down by 1 point. So
Mm.
imagine you lose 10 pounds, right? Now it may drop 5 points, in your blood pressure reading. Or if you lose 20 pounds, now it's going to maybe drop 10 points. So for me, I try to get people to work on just small gradual changes. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I want to lose a pound a week. The way I look at it is, let's say you wanted to lose even, 10 pounds over the course of a year, just 10 pounds total. If you really break that down, 10 pounds really equates to like 100 calories a day you just need to get rid of. So that could be through food, like just not taking a second helping of something. It could be cutting out that evening snack. It could be going, a little longer walk, right? So when you think about 100 calories, that's doable, right? Like that's not a huge, huge change in your lifestyle. It's just something small that you can kind of do. Or
Yeah,
if
I
you wanted
love
to
that.
lose 15 pounds, right? It's just 150 calories you got to get rid of. So, just try to think of just tiny little things that you can do in that way. Like sometimes switching to just eating off a smaller plate for foods where it's tempting to eat more of it. That's sort of what I do with pizza and spaghetti, right? I'm like, oh, I have to put it on a smaller plate because if I take a big plate, I'll put more food on there. So it's just those sneaky little things get you to really just naturally cut back on calories a little. And then it's not such a huge change, right? It's doable.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
I
just
love
kind
that
of my
idea.
quick tips there. Okay, last thing we want to talk about for lowering blood pressure has to do with limiting alcohol because that does contribute to high blood pressure as well. So can you go through some of that with people or with our
Sure,
listeners?
sure. Yeah. So, if you're not familiar, the recommendations are for us not to drink more than 2 drinks a day for men and one for women. So, if you are a regular drinker, try to keep it to less than those levels. Of course, it's probably better if drinking is more on a social basis and not something that's everyday pattern. But if you
Mhm.
can limit the amount of alcohol that you're drinking, you will see an improvement in your blood pressure. So, for those that maybe were drinking a bit more than that or drinking on a consistent basis, if they were to stop, we see about a 10-point reduction in their blood pressure in general. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's kind of a big change. Just as a reminder, when we talk about a serving, it's 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounces of hard liquor. And so sometimes I think we kind of skew the amount of alcohol that we think we're drinking as well. So I kind of throw that in there for that
Yeah,
reason.
5 ounces of wine. For those of you who don't drink wine, that's not a huge amount of wine. I look
No.
at my wine glass and how much some of those wine glasses can hold, and I can see where you might be getting actually 2 drinks in your one glass of wine or close to that, right? So with that one, I think you have to be especially careful.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned red wine, and that's interesting because I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I heard red wine was really good for my heart, so I try to drink a lot of red wine to help my heart." There is truth to the fact that there's some good components in red wine. The antioxidants that come actually from the dark skin on the grapes are very cardioprotective. So they help protect the lining of the blood vessels and protect them from getting
Mhm.
damaged and weakened, like we spoke about at the beginning. And then actually, the alcohol in the red wine has been found to be beneficial for raising our good cholesterol. That's the HDL.
Mhm.
And then it also
Mhm.
reduces the chance of forming blood clots. So I will say, which we've probably heard before, red wine can be an option if you're choosing to drink. There may be a little bit of benefit there, but again, as you say, it's all about the serving size or portion size and keeping it to a limited amount. So we don't encourage people to start drinking in order to improve their heart health.
Right, because we talked about all those other things that you could do, even just in relation to keeping blood pressure in check, right? We could eat healthy and exercise. So if you're doing all those other things, you don't have to start drinking alcohol to keep your heart healthy, right?
Right.
But it's okay in small amounts, right? Like we were
Exactly.
talking about before.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
last tip there is just don't add it up, because I often get asked, well, if I don't drink Monday through Friday, can I have several drinks on Saturday?
Oh,
And, my answer, of course, and I'm sure yours would be too, is no. Well, try not to do that, right? Because in small amounts, alcohol is fine for your heart. In much larger quantities, that's when it does damage, right?
exactly, exactly. And actually, women are much more susceptible to the detrimental effects of over drinking, or even, as you say, kind of binge drinking. So saving it up and having a lot. Women, for some reason, are much more susceptible from a cardiac perspective if they do that. So I agree with you totally. Let's just keep it in moderation and not save it all up for the weekend.
Right, right. Now, since we're talking about alcohol, I actually just did a podcast on alcohol in your heart. So if you missed that one, you can go and check that out in the Queen of Hearts podcast selection. We've talked about several things that can lower blood pressure. What do you think is the most important, if you could narrow it down to something like that? I know they're
Yeah.
all important, but if you could pick one to really kind of focus on, what would it be?
Right, right. Yeah, they all have an impact. And the nice thing about it is they all kind of work together. So you get some synergy and you get enhanced benefits if you can focus on many things. But I think if you had to pick just one thing to do, a great place to start would probably be in what we spoke about with limiting the sodium and adding those potassium rich foods. If you are able to do that successfully over time, this is the one that probably has the greatest reduction in those numbers. And again, can move your blood pressure reading down by maybe over 10 points if you're able to do that. So again, I kind of go for small changes in each of the areas being really helpful. And again, working together to achieve that. But I would think if you're the person who says, I'm only going to do one thing, I would really suggest starting with limiting that sodium and then trying to add in those potassium rich fruits and vegetables and nuts that you talked about.
Okay. Well, sounds good. I love all of that. All right. So, thank you so much, Kirsten, for being on this podcast with me today and sharing your knowledge on high blood pressure and what we can all do to lower that. I think that's going to be really helpful to people. So, thank you for listening in today, everyone. And as we always say, be the ruler of your own heart. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Queen of Hearts podcast. Our podcast is recorded here at the Karen Yontz Women's Cardiac Awareness Center inside Aurora St. Luke's Medical Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. For more heart-healthy tips, info, recipes, and more, visit our website at www.KarenYontzCenter.org, like us on Facebook at Karen Yontz Center, and follow us on Pinterest. If you like what you hear, subscribe to our show and be sure to tell your friends. Until next time, ladies, be ruler of your own heart.